On the 28th day of the Cold War, he came to the hospital to pick me up and my children home for the first time. But the head nurse stopped him. Mr. Gu, your wife suffered from dystocia and hemorrhage, and both mother and son were not saved. Your secretary said that there was no need to inform. Mr. Gu had no time to take care of it. High-quality romantic stories are in Romantic Business Wars. Don't forget to praise, leave messages, share and subscribe. The lights of the corridor outside the delivery room. The pale words. After 28 days of the Cold War, Gu Yanqi finally showed up. His tie was slightly messy and his suit jacket was in the crook of his arms. His face, which had always been golden, was full of irritability and arrogance. He walked in strides, followed by Su Ziyi, a secretary with a nervous expression. Gu Yanqi didn't even look at the direction of the rescue room where I was. He went straight to the nurse's station. His voice was as cold as ice. Pei Qing didn't come out and told him that I didn't accept this evasive trick. The divorce agreement was kept at home. If he wanted to gain attention, he didn't have. He seemed to believe in that I was still in a mood and was still forcing him to compromise with this self-mutilation. The head nurse looked up and her eyes quickly turned from initial consternation to cold. He closed the notebook in his hand, his tone flat and without ups and downs. Mr. Gu, you are late. Gu Yan frowned, raised his hand and glanced at his watch. His tone became more and more uncomfortable. I was very busy and told him that I only had 10 minutes. Mr. Gu, your wife's rescue failed 2 hours ago, and both mother and child were not saved. The head nurse's words fell calmly, like a poisoned nail. The air was stagnant, and Gu Yan's mouth twitching, as if he had heard some big joke. He sneered aloud. In order to help him perform the play, your hospital worked very hard and told him not to play. This is his death certificate. The head nurse threw a stack of properly signed documents on the table with a stern expression. In addition, this is a communication record intercepted by your secretary, Miss Su Ziyi, during Ms. Pei's hemorrhage. Miss Su personally told the medical staff on the phone that there is no need to inform Mr. Gu. Mr. Gu has no time to take care of these rotten things. If she dies, you can contact the crematorium directly. Gu Yan's body froze. He turned his head and stared at Su Ziyi hiding behind him. Su Ziyi's face was pale and trembling. Gu Zong, I thought he was threatening you with death. I was afraid of affecting your afternoon's cross-border merger. He slapped through the corridor with a clear slap in the face. Gu Yan's palm was still shaking. He stared at the death certificate with the official seal, which was fixed on the handwriting confirmed by the insiders. He never thought that losing the word would appear so concretely in his life. She thought that the marriage that controlled the overall situation seemed to be uprooted at this moment. He pushed the head nurse aside and staggered into the delivery room, where the curtain was violently lifted. He wanted to take a look at the woman who was always meek waiting for him, but only saw that the medical staff were withdrawing the instruments in an orderly manner. On the hospital bed, a thin figure was covered with white cloth. There was no breathing or ups and downs. It was frighteningly quiet. Gu Yanqi rushed to the bed. When his fingertips touched the wear-resistant cold and hard touch, his pupils suddenly contracted. He wanted to lift the white cloth, but his hands were shaking beyond control. Pei Qing tried to call my name, but his voice was so dumb that no one answered him. In this delivery room, except for the smell of disinfectant, only his heavy gasps due to panic were left. 28 days ago, when he slammed the door, I was quietly serving him soup at the table, and 28 days later, all he was waiting for was a body without temperature. The air in the delivery room was as cold as solidified lead. Gu Yanqi stood by the bed. The hand hanging on the edge of the white cloth did not dare to fall after all. His eyes, which had always been deep and unstoppable, were full of chaos. He maintained a stiff posture, his eyes locked on the slightly raised lines of the white cloth, trying to find a false flaw in it. It can't be true, Gu Yanqi muttered to himself. His voice was very low, but with suffocating combat power. He also sent me a report yesterday. Dr. Chen Yu, who had been standing at the door, pushed the door and walked in. He was wearing a white coat, calm and restrained, holding a detailed first aid record in his hand. Please respect the deceased and keep your mind. Gu Yanxi suddenly turned around and grabbed the collar of the idiom. His strength almost suffocated him. You told me he was acting. Right. As long as you pay, you can help him fake his death. Right. Idioms did not evade, but calmly looked at Gu Yan's out-of-control face. And even a trace of imperceptible sarcasm hung on the corners of his mouth. Gu Zong. The public relations department of Gushi Group should have calmed the stock price by now. Are you worried about him or your fortune? This sentence was like a slap in the face, accurately hitting Gu Yan's fragile nerves. She let go of her hand and staggered back a step. He's really worried. Just now, she received news from the board of directors that because she refused to respond to her marital status for 28 days, a series of investment agreements in the story were temporarily frozen by the bank on the grounds that the marital assets were uncertain. Gu Yanxi's eyes were in a fierce game between panic and reason. He looked at the cold monitor in front of him. The waveform that once represented my heartbeat was drawing a straight line, meaningless at the moment. That was the existence he didn't care about the least. But now the straight line made him feel a dull pain that his soul had never been pulled away. Move him to the top single ward. Gu Yanxi took a deep breath, forcibly pressed down the disorder in his heart, trying to find a sense of control with orders. To invite the best doctor. To go abroad to find authority. No matter what method. I want him to wake up. Biological death cannot be reversed. Mr. Gu. Chen Yu interrupted him coldly. And now every minute is delaying the disposal of his body. If you are for the so-called face, or to show your deep feeling to the outside world, you don't have. Ms. Pei left only one sentence on her deathbed. Gu Yanxi raised his head and his eyes lit up with a trace of hope. What did he say? He said that the most regretful thing in this life is to meet the fittest you at the best age. Gu Yan's body suddenly shook, and the always arrogant face was as pale as paper for an instant. He wanted to refute, to say that I was deliberately angry with him, but the words came to his lips, but they only turned into a depressed low roar. He looked at the figure covered by white cloth and suddenly found that even if he owned the entire business empire, he did not even have the bargaining chip to recover when faced with this complete decision. He stood stiffly, watching the nurse slowly push the hospital bed away, the feeling of emptiness drowning her senses like a tide. He took out his cell phone, dialed Su Zi's phone with trembling fingers, cancelled all today's itinerary, and blocked the news of the hospital. Who dares to leak half a word? I made him disappear from the business. Su Zi at the other end of the phone was frightened by his coldly. Gu Yanxi put down his cell phone, but felt that the air around him was still desperate. He always thought that as long as he wanted, I would always stand still and wait for him. Only now did he realize that some things, once broken in the instant of his negligence, would never be pieced together again. In the transfer channel of the intensive care unit, I hid in the surveillance dead corner on the other side, coldly looking at Gu Yanxi's slouched back. It was the first time in these 28 days that I was so close to him, but I felt separated by the sky. When it was confirmed that he had left the ward completely to deal with the commercial public relations mess about Mrs. Gu's death, I got up quickly. The original body covered by white cloth was actually a simulation model of the hospital's coordination and placement to complete the most critical identity decoupling. Back to the safe house prepared for me by the idiom. I didn't have half the luck of narrowly surviving, only the accurate calculation of time. When I sat in front of the computer, the internal server entrance of the story group had already been cracked by the private terminal I set up. I call up all the documents about my personal assets and equity and start the final step of cutting. Gu Yan's words are too arrogant. She thinks that marriage is only an accessory to commercial marriage for him. As long as he does not want to divorce, I will always be the legal dependency on the storybook. But she forgot that in the past 5 years, as the actual chief financial officer of the story, I have left behind every M in a case and every overseas fund establishment. Since he thinks I'm a Mrs. Gu who can be placed at will, I'll show him what value his marriage certificate has when the ownership of the assets is completely stripped away. I sneered at the screen and tapped my fingers on the keyboard. I dismantled all the mobilizable liquidity in my name through a 5-tier offshore account in a flash and eventually remitted it to a shell company called Light No Capital. This is not a simple misappropriation. but a legal asset recovery that I used the authorization contract signed by Gu Yanxi to avoid tax. Chang Yu pushed the door and came in and handed me a cup of warm water, with a trace of anxiety in his eyes. You moved too fast. Gu Yanxi, once a person at that level notices abnormal accounts, he will go crazy. His current state is extremely unstable. If he finds out that you are fake death, the consequences will be unimaginable. I took the glass and looked up at him, my eyes calm and sharp. He didn't have a chance to realize that I was legally dead, and dead people couldn't sign any asset transfer contracts. However, in order to maintain the stability of the stock market's share price, he must announce the sad news of his widow at the shareholders' meeting next week. I paused without a trace of temperature in my tone. As long as he announced, he must cooperate with the lawyer to complete the liquidation of my assets. At this point, if he dares to question every flow, it means that he must disclose all the financial data involved in my life. Chang Yu, do you think he dares to check his tax black hole full of loopholes? Chang Yu was silent for a moment, then showed a wry smile of approval. You counted him into your bones. This is called a game. I turned off the terminal and the screen displayed the words, 100% progress of asset liquidation. I looked out of the window at the lights, which I once thought was my destination, but now I just felt ridiculous. Gu Yanxi is used to standing at the top looking down at me, so let him taste the taste of falling into the quagmire from the top. But he can't even catch the corner of my clothes. 6 hours before dawn, invitations to the funeral have been sent to the top floors of the business circle. Gu Yan quit to put on an affectionate play at that funeral, to stabilize the investor, and I will watch behind the scenes with a brand new identity as to how he is torn down by my legal team one by one his elaborate business disguise. The funeral was held at the Banshan Cemetery. The scene was all black and white and solemn. Gu Yanxi stood in front of the tombstone, and the whole person was wrapped in great grief. He was wearing an expensive pure black suit with an unopened mourning armband on his cufflinks. The whole person lost a lot of weight. Even the usual sense of coercion seemed to be replaced by some kind of decadence. Many business giants stood in the distance and whispered, looking at this usually arrogant story with a complicated look. President Mr. Gu, I'm sorry. A familiar senior shareholder stepped forward and tried to hand over a project agreement that needed to be signed urgently. But the operation of the company cannot stop. Here is a supplementary agreement on overseas investment, but also need the general seal. Gu Yan's fingers clenched violently, and the white daisy joints in her hands were white with force. He turned his head, and there was a frightening hostility in his eyes. Didn't he hear? Today is her funeral. Anyone who dares to mention the company will not have to appear in the story tomorrow. He played so well that he almost fooled me with his heart-wringing appearance. Just then, several low-key black cars slowly drove in. Zhao Cheng, a commercial litigation lawyer known in the industry, led 6 professionals in dark professional attire and walked straight through the crowd in full view. Gu Yan's eyes narrowed and motioned for the bodyguard to stop the way. Mr. Gu, we are the private lawyer team entrusted by Ms. Pei Qinggu before her death. Zhao Cheng's voice was calm, without the slightest emotion, and it was particularly harsh at the solemn funeral scene. Today is the last asset delivery order signed by Ms. Pei, who has passed away. Gu Yan said sneer, hoarse and dangerous. Any delivery order without my consent will be invalid. I'm afraid Mr. Gu is mistaken. It is not only a delivery order, but also a commercial privacy confidentiality ban with the highest legal effect. According to the agreement, all assets in Ms. Pei's name were fully managed through a trust mechanism 48 hours ago. At this stage, you are only a surviving person, not an asset manager. Gu Yanxi's face changed suddenly. He stepped forward and lowered his voice to denounce. Are you trying to tell me that I have no right to dispose of my wife's money? Before her death, your wife, Ms. Pei Qinggu, had completed the split and cancellation of the shares of the 3 core subsidiaries of Gu's group. Zhao Cheng not only did not return, but spread out a complicated financial audit report in front of him. Mr. Gu, you just said that you love him very much. But if you open this report, you will find that The private account under your name was locked by the offshore regulatory account set up by MS Pei 28 days ago because of suspected improper related transactions with the above 3 subsidiaries. There was a commotion in the crowd. Gu Yan trembled and took over the report. When his eyes touched the familiar overseas capital links that originally belonged to his secret operation, his pupils suddenly contracted, and the whole person seemed to be splashed with a basin of ice water. It turned out that his so-called affectionate performance of controlling everything became not only the biggest joke in the face of these cold audit logic, but also the starting point of his business credit collapse. He looked at the inquiring eyes cast by the guests around him, and the original perfect affectionate widow was set at this moment in a rift that could not be repaired. He wanted to get angry and overturn the documents, but behind the team of lawyers stood representatives of several top audit firms. Once he breaks out, what awaits him is public questioning of financial compliance. Gu Yan's words stood stiffly in front of the tombstone. At that moment, he finally understood that what I left him was not a death, but an inescapable business ending that had been carefully arranged for several years. The air of the funeral solidified into an iron plate. Gu Yan's words stared at the red warning marks on the audit report, and the blue veins on his forehead beat violently. At this moment, Su Zi, who had been shrinking on the edge of the crowd, turned pale because of panic, which attracted the attention of members of the lawyer team. That was Gu Yanqi's confidant and the only insider who cut off all my distress messages for him in these 28 days. Miss Su. Lawyer Zhao Cheng turned around, his tone still without ups and downs, but with unquestionable strength. Just now Mr. Gu questioned the legality of these asset changes, but according to the communication records and server logs we have, 28 days ago, Ms. Pei Qinggu sent 3 urgent medical help emails to the story office before she died, all of which were automatically intercepted and deleted by your personal account. Gu Yan suddenly turned to look at Su Zi. His eyes, which were bloodshot with anger, no longer reflected the effective secretary on weekdays, but a culprit who pushed him into the abyss beyond redemption. Su Zi was paralyzed and his voice trembled. Gu Zong, I really thought he was acting. I just wanted you to concentrate on handling overseas mergers and acquisitions. You said at the time that as long as it is about his bad things, there is no need to report to you. Shut up. Gu Yan's voice was so cold that he could not explain to the outside world why he gave such cold instructions. This is no longer a simple secretarial dereliction of duty, but a direct result of the collapse of the core-related assets of the Gu Group. The lawyer team did not stop. Zhao Cheng took out a copy of the written report letter dated 1 month ago and handed it directly to the person in charge of industry supervision present. This is a report document submitted by Ms. Pei before her death, involving evidence of several illegal commercial loans by Mr. Gu in the past 5 years. Originally, this was only the last insurance that Ms. Pei left to herself. Now, because Mr. Gu cannot prove the normal flow of these assets, we have to hand it over. Gu Yan's Adam's apple rolled violently, and he was forced to take the report letter in full view of the public. He turned to the first page, which clearly listed the false financial operations he carried out in order to expand rapidly, using my personal guarantee, each of which directly pointed to criminal responsibility. This is the legacy I left him. I don't need him to repent. I just need to peel off his glamorous president's skin piece by piece in front of everyone. Mr. Gu, due to the lack of the main body of asset ownership, you are now facing not only the company's financial verification, but also the risk of being sued by creditors. Zhao Cheng closed the document and finally made up a knife. Now that the shares of Gu's Group have fallen below the issue price, are you sure you want to continue this meaningless and affectionate play at this funeral? Gu Yan's hand shook to report the light landing. He raised his eyes to the empty tombstone. The panic of losing me gave way to the fear of falling into the abyss completely. He always thought I was an accessory, but now he found that all his commercial power had already been cut off by me. He stood there, facing the eyes of industry leaders, and for the first time realized what is really abandoned. It was not that I abandoned him, but that I took away all the confidence he had as General Gu. On the 10th day after the funeral, Gu's Group was mired in financial fraud and business investigations, and its share price fell like a cliff. I changed into a well-cut navy blue suit, rolled up my long hair and put on a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. At this moment, I am no longer Mrs. Gu curled up in the shadow of her family. Instead, as the CEO of Light Bullying Capital, he was formally invited to participate in the debt restructuring closed-door session that Gu's group had to hold. The meeting room was full of smoke and Gu Yancy sat at the top. In just 10 days, his eyes were black and blue, and the old gold and arrogance were replaced by exhaustion and sound quality. He is dealing with creditors of several banks in an attempt to delay the repayment of debts. The door was pushed open and I walked in with a professional legal team. The sound of high heels hitting the marble floor was particularly clear in the dead silence of the conference room. Gu Yan's originally downcast eyes suddenly lifted up, and the moment he saw me again, his breathing seemed to stop at that moment. He stared at me, his pupils trembling, and even the folder in his hand slipped to the ground, making a crisp noise. Pei Qing's voice was hoarse, even with a trace of imperceptible trembling. I went straight to the other end of the conference table and sat down gracefully. My eyes calmly swept over his face out of control due to extreme shock. My tone was formulaic and indifferent. Mr. Gu, please pay attention to your words and deeds. I am Pei Qing, the representative of Qinggu Capital. Ms. Wu is deceased. Guifeng confirmed this at the funeral 10 days ago. Didn't she? He suddenly stood up from his chair and turned over the water cup on the table. The water trail snaked down, ignoring the bank executive sitting in the conference room. He strode to me, trying to reach out and grab my shoulder. My bodyguard stepped sideways to block his touch. Mr. Gu, before talking about business cooperation, please put away this rude behavior. I lifted my eyes coldly, and the line of sight under my glasses was as sharp and light as a scalpel. Capital was entrusted by the creditor alliance to take over the pledged shares of your company due to illegal-related transactions. Gu Yancy stared at my face, trying to find a trace that I was still angry, or what he saw in the cemetery was just an illusion. But what he saw was only absolute rationality and strangeness. You're not dead. He stared at me, his voice with a morbid obsession, as if he had grasped the last straw. These 10 days, you've been watching me, dealing with that mess like a joke, in order to revenge me. You even did not hesitate to fake death. Mr. Gu, please look at the contract. I opened the documents in front of me and pushed them in front of him, my tone still cold. Your focus now should be on the evidence of your financial irregularities has been completed by the Economic Investigation Department. If you don't want to hear a subpoena next week, sign the share transfer agreement. As for who I am, in business, this has nothing to do with your company's asset restructuring. He looked at my signature on the contract, which was his incomparably familiar handwriting, but signed it on the field of Qinggu Capital's agent. Everything he once owned is now being legally stripped away little by little through the contract in my hand. He finally realized that I was not playing Cold War with him, nor was I waiting for him to bow his head. I was giving the deadliest harvest when he was weakest as a hunter. The air pressure in the conference room was so low that it was suffocating. Gu Yan resigned and pressed his hand on the agreement. Directly innocent, he stared at me, and the unbelievable enthusiasm in his eyes was dying out little by little, replaced by a completely broken down depression. So, this is your answer for the past 5 years? He asked in a deep voice, no longer having the usual sense of command in his voice, but with a trace of imperceptible fragmentation. No matter what I did in my marriage, you never really gave me your heart, did you? I closed my pen and looked at him calmly. Mr. Gu, before we talk about hearts, talk about business contracts. Every sum of money you violate the rules has your autograph. In this society ruled by law, legal logic is far more convincing than emotional appeal. The creditors around looked at each other, and no one dared to interrupt. Everyone can see that Gu Yancy is experiencing a spiritual collapse. If I sign this agreement, Gu Yan's words stared at me with burning eyes, as if to find the once docile Pei Qing 5 through my reason. You'll really never look back at me, will you? Mr. Gu, the terms of the contract do not include personal emotional counseling. I didn't even avoid his gaze, and that calmness made him look even more embarrassed. In addition, As a reminder, this conference room is equipped with a real-time synchronous recorder. Any words and deeds you say will be regarded as a threat or interference to creditors. Please respect yourself. Gu Yanxi's mouth pulled out a bitter radian. He probably never thought that one day the woman who did not even dare to speak loudly in front of him would use such an indifferent and professional posture. Force him into a corner. If you hate me, you can tell me directly. Maybe I don't need to hate. I interrupted him calmly, my tone undulating. There is a great need to invest in emotional costs, and you are currently on my list of accounts. Just a bad debt that needs to be liquidated as soon as possible. Emotion is a luxury. Mr. Gu, you are no longer qualified to pay him. He froze for a few seconds and suddenly let out a low, suppressed laugh. Trembling, he picked up his pen and signed his name on the transfer agreement. At that moment, I heard the end of the glorious era belonging to the story group. He finished signing, put down his pen, and the whole portrait was siphoned off several cars. Instead of looking at me again, he stumbled towards the door of the conference room. At the moment when she pushed open the door, she paused, but did not turn back after all. I looked at the agreement, and there was no pleasure after revenge in my heart, only a kind of relief. I not only took back everything that belonged to me, but also completely cut off the legal path for any future intersection between him and his child. He thought I was playing games, but in fact I was just cleaning up the garbage. When I left the story office building, it was almost dusk, but I did not go home directly, but drove to the private clinic on the outskirts of the city, where Cheng Yu was waiting for me. We had to complete the identity of the last step. As soon as the isolation car stopped, a dark Maybach bit my tail from the corner. It's Gu Yan's words. Instead of flustered, I calmly dialed Cheng Yu's internal line. Gu Yan's words came up. Start the secondary security defense agreement. Let the lawyer team immediately file with the police station in the jurisdiction, and submit an application on the grounds of suspected retaliation and sexual harassment. The car stopped smoothly in the driveway in front of the clinic. Gu Yanxi's Maybach almost wiped the rear of my car and stopped. He pushed open the door and moved wildly. The coldness on his face that had lasted for many days completely collapsed. Pei Qingyu, what about the child? His voice was hoarse and he staggered with every step, like a badly wounded beast. There was no sign of the baby in the delivery room that day. Where did you hide the baby? I opened the door gracefully and stood between the two cars, surrounded by a wall of professional bodyguards I had hired in advance. Mr. Gu, your thinking logic seems to be still 28 days ago. I looked at him indifferently, and the sense of alienation made him completely red-eyed. I went crazy to check all your medical records that day. He rushed to the bodyguard and stared at me. There was no birth record at all. You lied to me. You lied to me all the time. That child is not at all. But that child has never existed in this world as an heir to the family. I interrupted him, in an understated tone, yet as precise as the tip of a knife. Mr. Gu, legally, there is no parent-child relationship without a birth certificate. No matter how eager you are to make up now, it is only your personal imagination. I'm his father, he growled, even a trace of blood coming in and out of the corner of his eye. Father. I ridiculed the corners of my mouth, took out a court-issued no harassment order from my handbag and slapped it directly on his chest. This document has come into effect and has been synchronized to all security companies under the story. From this moment on, if you are trying to approach me or any of my asset affiliates, your actions will directly violate the personal safety protection regulations. Mr. Gu, your deep feelings are worthless in front of this court document. He held the thin paper stiffly, his fingertips shaking so hard that he could hardly hold it. The sense of authority from high above dispersed little by little in his hands, leaving only the desolation imprisoned by law. He wanted to move forward, but the uniform regression of the bodyguards made him realize that I had already paved every net for her. She lost, not only the company, but also the only faint fire in the world that can prove that he once had a family. Gu Yan's ban on harassment was crushed into waste paper, but he did not even dare to tear it up. That means that the ban is not only a restriction on his whereabouts, but also a complete stripping of his social identity. Before he could speak, Several commercial vehicles with the words tax inspection slowly drove into the clinic parking lot, followed by several grim-looking economic investigation police officers. Mr. Gu Yanxi, as you are suspected of falsifying the audit data of overseas offshore companies during the financial restructuring of Gu Group, please cooperate with us to go to the Bureau for investigation. The leading officer presented his papers in a steady and unmistakable tone. At this moment, Gu Yan's last bit of arrogance disappeared completely. He turned to look at me, a flash of extreme confusion in his eyes. He finally realized that all this was not only a commercial liquidation, but also a complete collapse of the legal level. His arrogance in the past 5 years have all turned into evidence in court at this moment. When he was taken away in handcuffs by police officers, his once upright body looked particularly rickets. As he passed me, he stopped to say something, but he coughed violently because he was too depressed. Pei Qingyu, if I hadn't treated you like that. His voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. With a kind of humble, almost pleading, I didn't look at him, but calmly adjusted the collar of my suit and looked straight ahead. Mr. Gu, the cheapest thing in the incident is after the fact. If your current situation is due to every arrogant decision you have made, the law will not erase the harm you have done to others because of your confession. The police car roared away, taking away the last of his decency. Chen Yu walked out of the clinic, looked at the string of faraway taillights, and breathed a sigh of relief. You've done enough. This time, the core assets under his name will be frozen, and the bankruptcy liquidation of Gu's Group is a foregone conclusion. He never got a chance to find out where the kid was. This is not absolute. It is the end. I turned around and walked inside the clinic. I walked into the ward and the child was sleeping quietly in the crib, holding a wooden doll I just bought in my hand. Looking at the child's immature face, the hard barrier in my heart finally softened for a moment. These 28 days of escape, forgery, death, asset dismantling, and even forced Gu Yanxi to a desperate situation in this commercial war. All of this is not just to protect this pure land. I picked up my mobile phone again and permanently cancelled the social account that had been associated with Gu Yanxi for 5 years. At the moment when I completely cut off the connection, I felt an unprecedented freedom. This 5-year-long exercise of Mrs. Gu finally fell into my hands. Zhongmu. 3 years later, in the private dock of the coastal city, the sea breeze was brackish. I was wearing a plain and elegant linen dress and was teaching my 5-year-old child to identify the model of the sail. The child has the shadow of Gu Yan's resignation between his eyebrows and eyes, but his temperament is calm, which is entirely my educational achievement. The private helicopter in the distance landed slowly, and the idiom walked out of the hatch, holding a copy of the latest industry briefing in his hand. His face was a little complicated. He's coming out. The idiom came up behind me with a low voice and stayed inside for 3 years. When he came out, he was almost a different person. The movement of my hands was slightly stagnant, and then I regained my calm and continued to adjust the child's life jacket. This has nothing to do with me. He has completely lost custody and property control rights in law. Even if we come out, we are still people of 2 worlds. He sold his ancestral home and dispersed his last asset, just to find a shadow named Pei Qingyu around the world. Chen Yu looked at my side face and hesitated. He even hired an international search team to search for every similar clue like crazy. I stood up, facing the sea breeze, looking into the distance. Gu Yanxu's obsession, as early as 3 years ago when the ban came into effect, was destined to be a bitter journey that ended without a disease. He was used to conquering with power, but now he has tasted the price of being completely forgotten. This bitter fruit is his best repayment for his indifference in the past 5 years. Let him find it. I took the child's hand and turned to the yacht. There has never been a Mrs. Gu in this world, only a completely free individual. She was looking for the doll she had trapped in the cage, and the man had died in the hemorrhage in the delivery room. The child looked back at the dock and naively asked, "Mom, where are we going?" I went to a place where no one knew us and spent the rest of my life. I didn't look back. Behind him was the old cage that Gu Yanxu had tried to block with power, and in front of him was the endless high sea that belonged to me and my children. The past sadomasochism and collapse are just a period of necrotic tissue that must be cut off in a long life for me now. I completely stripped the identity that used his surname and threw all my memories of her, together with that absurd marriage, into the deep sea. Gu Yanxi. The search for the rest of my life is doomed to wither in the endless desolation, and I have walked out of the nightmare called Mrs. Gu and opened a grand rest of life that truly belongs to me and is absolutely independent. The story is over. Thank you for your company. See you next time.